In the year 2000, a federal judge in Washington picked up his pen and signed an order that would split Microsoft in two. One half would own Windows. The other half would own everything else. This was a federal court order, signed, filed, final. Bill Gates said he would fight it all the way to the Supreme Court. Wall Street panicked. Legal experts called it the most significant antitrust ruling since the breakup of AT&T, and then it disappeared. The order was reversed. The breakup was canceled. Microsoft walked away whole. The appeals court that threw out the breakup did not disagree with the judge. They agreed with him. Microsoft was a monopoly. Microsoft had broken the law. Microsoft had crushed competitors using tactics the court itself called anti-competitive. Every single one of those findings survived. The court did not say the judge was wrong about Microsoft. They said he made one mistake, a mistake that had nothing to do with the evidence, the law, and the facts of the case. He talked to reporters. That one decision cost him everything. His name was Thomas Penfield Jackson. He died in 2013 at the age of 76. He never got to see what his ruling could have become. And today, 26 years after he signed that order, the Federal Trade Commission is investigating Microsoft for doing the same thing all over again. In 1996, Netscape Navigator held over 80% of the browser market. Within 6 years, Internet Explorer had taken over 90%. Netscape went from dominating the web to near extinction in half a decade. And it did not happen because Microsoft built a better product. It happened because Microsoft gave Internet Explorer away for free, bundled it with every copy of Windows 95 and Windows 98, negotiated exclusive deals with computer manufacturers like Compaq, Dell, and IBM to pre-install Internet Explorer on every new PC, and then made it nearly impossible for those manufacturers to remove it or install a competing browser. Netscape, which had been charging for its browser, watched its entire business model collapse overnight, not because people stopped wanting Navigator, because Microsoft made sure they never had to choose. The Department of Justice and the Attorneys General of 20 states sued Microsoft on May 18, 1998, under the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, the same law that broke up Standard Oil. The trial lasted 18 months. Bill Gates was not called to the stand, but his videotaped deposition was played extensively in court. And in that deposition, Gates was evasive, argumentative, and at times appeared to contradict his own company's internal documents. Judge Jackson watched all of it, and what he concluded after reviewing hundreds of internal Microsoft emails was devastating. He did not just find that Microsoft had a monopoly. He found that Microsoft had weaponized that monopoly to systematically destroy anyone who threatened it. In his findings of fact, he wrote that Microsoft had demonstrated it would use its prodigious market power and immense profits to harm any firm that pursued initiatives that could intensify competition against its core products. He wrote that Microsoft's success in hurting such companies deters investment in technologies and businesses that exhibit the potential to threaten Microsoft. And then he wrote the sentence that should haunt every person who uses a computer today, that some innovations that would truly benefit consumers never occur for the sole reason that they do not coincide with Microsoft's self-interest. The judge found, as a matter of legal fact, that software which would have made your life better was never built because Microsoft made sure it could not exist. That finding was never overturned, not by the appeals court, not by anyone. But what happened before that finding, the meeting that started all of this, tells you everything you need to know about how Microsoft operated. In June of 1995, a group of Microsoft executives walked into Netscape's offices. The stated purpose was to explore ways the two companies could work together. Netscape was the dominant force in the browser market. Microsoft was a tech giant that had barely begun to think about the internet. Mark Andreessen was there. He was 23 years old and already a rising star in Silicon Valley, the co-founder of the company that was defining how ordinary people experienced the internet. Within a year, he would appear on the cover of Time magazine, barefoot, sitting on a golden throne, styled as the king of the new digital economy. But in that room in June of 1995, he was still building. Netscape's CEO, James Barksdale, was also in the room. What happened next would become central evidence in the trial. According to Netscape's account, later corroborated through testimony and internal documents, Microsoft proposed dividing the browser market. Netscape would keep browsers on operating systems other than Windows. Microsoft would own the Windows browser market entirely. The message was clear: stay off our territory and we will leave you alone. Cross the line and we will destroy you. Netscape refused. Andreessen would later describe the meeting in his deposition to the Department of Justice using a reference most people understood. He said he expected to find a bloody computer monitor in his bed the next day. Microsoft responded exactly as threatened. 2 months later, in August of 1995, Microsoft released Internet Explorer 1.0. It was a crude product, hastily built from a licensed version of Spyglass Mosaic. Early versions were clearly inferior to Navigator, but it did not matter. Microsoft did not need a better browser. Microsoft needed distribution, and it had something Netscape could never match: control of the operating system that ran on more than 90% of the world's personal computers. Over the next 3 years, Microsoft poured resources into Internet Explorer, improved it rapidly, welded it into Windows so deeply that removing it broke the operating system, and systematically pressured every hardware manufacturer, internet service provider, and content company to favor Explorer over Navigator. By 1998, Netscape was sold to AOL for $4.2 billion, a number that sounds impressive until you realize the company's best days were already years behind it. The business was already dead by the time the check cleared. None of this was speculation. This is what the trial proved with Microsoft's own internal documents. But the trial also revealed the full scale of the damage, and it explains why Judge Jackson decided that the only remedy severe enough was to break the company apart. On November 5, 1999, Judge Jackson issued his findings of fact, a massive document that methodically dismantled every argument Microsoft had made in its defense. He found that Microsoft possessed monopoly power. He found that Microsoft had maintained that monopoly through anti-competitive means. He found that Microsoft had attempted to monopolize the web browser market. And he found that Microsoft's actions had harmed consumers. 5 months later, on April 3, 2000, he issued his conclusions of law. Microsoft had committed multiple violations of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Then came the remedy. The Justice Department proposed something that had not been attempted against a technology company in modern American history. They wanted Microsoft split into 2 separate companies. One would control Windows, the other would control all applications, Office, Internet Explorer, everything else. Judge Jackson agreed. On June 7, 2000, he signed the order. Microsoft was to be broken in 2. The reaction was immediate. Microsoft's stock dropped billions in value. Bill Gates vowed to appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. Legal experts called it the most important antitrust ruling since the breakup of AT&T in 1982. But Jackson did something that would cost him everything. He talked to the press. In interviews with newspapers, magazines, and book authors, Jackson spoke with a bluntness that was extraordinary for a sitting federal judge. He told the New Yorker that Gates had a Napoleonic concept of himself and his company, an arrogance that derives from power and unalloyed success, with no leavening hard experience, no reverses. He said of Microsoft's executives that they don't act like grown-ups. He compared Microsoft's declarations of innocence to the protestations of gangland killers. Every word of it was probably true, and every word of it was a catastrophic mistake. Because Microsoft's lawyers now had the weapon they needed to undo everything. And when they used it, the consequences reached far beyond one court case. They shaped the entire technology industry you are living in right now. On June 28, 2001, the appeals court ruled unanimously. The breakup was reversed. Judge Jackson was removed from the case for what the court called serious judicial misconduct, his comments to the media. The case was sent to a different judge, Colleen Collar-Catelli, to determine a new penalty. The timing could not have been worse for the government. The Bush administration had taken office. The new Department of Justice had little appetite for pursuing a breakup. Microsoft and the government negotiated a settlement. Microsoft agreed to establish an internal antitrust compliance program, share some application programming interfaces with third-party companies, and submit to a consent decree that would expire in a few years. That was it. The company found guilty of illegally maintaining a monopoly was told to form an internal committee and promised to behave. Robert Land, a law professor at the University of Baltimore, had given the government 2-to-1 odds of winning the breakup on appeal before Jackson's press comments became public. After the comments, he said Microsoft had a 50% chance of walking completely. The judge's remarks did not change the facts. They changed the politics. Jackson himself had warned that behavioral remedies would not work. The government's own lawyers had argued the same thing. Microsoft had already violated a previous consent decree from 1995. History had already proven that rules and promises were not enough to constrain this company. Only structural separation would do it. The settlement went through anyway. And what the technology industry became after that settlement, what was built and what was never allowed to exist, is the answer to the question in the title of this video. Here is the future we were robbed of. Al Gillen, an analyst with the research firm IDC, laid out the most concrete version of what we lost. If Microsoft had been split in 2000, he argued, a company that owned Office but not Windows would have had no reason to protect the Windows client. It would have supported the iPad from day one. It would have brought Office to Linux. It would have competed on product quality rather than platform control, because it would have had no platform to control. Think about what that means. For over a decade after the trial, Microsoft deliberately withheld Office from competing platforms. There was no technical reason Office could not run on Linux or on Apple's mobile devices. The reason was strategic. Every copy of Office that ran only on Windows was a reason for businesses, governments, and individuals to stay locked into Windows. A standalone Office company, freed from that strategic obligation, would have made its software available everywhere, on every operating system, on every device, not years later after being dragged by market forces. From day one, and Office is just the beginning. Think about mobile. When Apple launched the iPhone in 2007, Microsoft was still treating mobile as an extension of Windows. Windows Mobile and later Windows Phone were both built around the assumption that Microsoft's desktop monopoly could be replicated on handheld devices. A separated Windows company would have been forced to compete on the merits of its operating system alone, without using Office as leverage. It might have built a genuinely competitive mobile platform, or it might have failed. Either way, the mobile market would have had 3 serious competitors instead of 2, and consumers would have had more choice. Now think about the browser. When Jackson ordered the breakup, Internet Explorer was dominant specifically because it was welded into Windows. A standalone applications company owning Internet Explorer would have needed that browser to survive on its own quality, not on the fact that it came pre-installed on 90% of the world's computers. That company would have had to innovate to keep users. Instead, what happened was that Microsoft won the browser war through bundling, then let Internet Explorer stagnate for nearly 5 years because it had no competition left. Internet Explorer 6, released in 2001, received almost no meaningful updates until 2006. 5 years of stagnation in the browser, the single most important piece of software most people used every day, because one company had eliminated every reason to improve it. Robert Land made the comparison to the AT&T breakup of 1982, when the telephone monopoly was split into 7 regional companies known as the Baby Bells. Those companies each became aggressive innovators, competing fiercely with each other and with new entrants. Land argued that the breakup accelerated the entire cell phone industry by several years because suddenly 7 companies were innovating instead of 1. Apply that logic to Microsoft. 2 Microsofts instead of 1, each needing to win customers on merit, each free to enter markets, the other dominated. Landa asked the question directly, What if one of those two companies had pushed hard into search and perfected the search engine? Microsoft was notoriously late to search. Bing did not launch until 2009, a full 11 years after Google. A standalone applications company, desperate for new revenue and free from the strategic distraction of protecting Windows, might have entered search years earlier and become a genuine competitor to Google before Google became untouchable. And then there is the question of cloud computing. The separated Windows company would have needed to evolve its operating system to remain relevant as computing moved online. Without Office as a captive bundle to keep enterprise customers locked in, it would have been forced to open Windows up, to support more third-party software, to interoperate with competing platforms, to treat Linux not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as an ecosystem to coexist with. The entire trajectory of cloud computing might have been different, but the cost goes beyond missed products and missed competition. Jackson's findings of fact describe the most insidious damage, the innovations that never happened. Not the companies that were crushed after they launched. The companies that never launched at all. The entrepreneurs who looked at what Microsoft did to Netscape, to IBM, to Compaq, to Intel, and decided the risk was not worth taking. The investors who declined to fund technologies that might attract Microsoft's attention. The ideas that died in conference rooms because someone said the words, "Microsoft will just bundle it with Windows." Jackson called it the most harmful consequence of Microsoft's behavior, not the damage to companies that fought and lost, the damage to companies that never fought at all, because they knew what would happen if they did. That chilling effect lasted for years, and its consequences are still with us. The internet we use today, the browsers, the search engines, the cloud platforms, the operating systems, was shaped not just by what was built, but by what was never allowed to exist. Now, in fairness, not everyone agrees that the breakup would have produced a better outcome. Joseph Caniglio, Director of Antitrust Policy at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, has argued that large firms are the ones with the resources and incentives to make the big investments that create genuinely new products. Breaking Microsoft in two might have produced two weaker companies, each less capable of the massive research and development spending that built Azure, that funded the partnership with OpenAI, that sustained decades of productivity software development. Scale has real value. Not every monopoly is a bad thing, and not every breakup produces competition. Sometimes it just produces two mediocre companies instead of one strong one. That argument has merit. Microsoft has built products and platforms that genuinely serve hundreds of millions of people. Azure is now one of the 3 largest cloud platforms in the world. The investment in OpenAI helped launch the current wave of artificial intelligence. It is not obvious that 2 smaller companies would have achieved the same things. But here is the other side, and it is the side that looks increasingly strong in 2026. The Federal Trade Commission has escalated its antitrust investigation into Microsoft, issuing civil investigative demands to 6 or more competitors. The investigation is examining whether Microsoft uses licensing restrictions and product bundling to illegally monopolize enterprise computing markets, cloud, productivity software, and AI. The probe is looking at barriers that prevent customers from using Microsoft products on rival platforms. It is examining the $13 billion partnership with OpenAI and whether it gives Microsoft unfair control over critical AI capabilities. Licensing restrictions, product bundling, using one dominant product to control adjacent markets, preventing customers from choosing competitors. That is the same behavior Judge Jackson found Microsoft guilty of in 2000. The same tactics, the same playbook, 26 years later. The only thing that changed is the product names. Windows became Azure, Internet Explorer became Copilot, Netscape became whatever company you have never heard of because it could not survive Microsoft's bundling. The settlement was supposed to prevent this. The compliance program, the consent decree, all of it was designed to stop Microsoft from repeating the behavior. Every one of those safeguards expired years ago. Jackson warned that anything less than structural separation would be temporary. 26 years of evidence suggest he was right. So here it is. A federal judge in Washington ordered the most powerful software company on earth to be split in two. He was a blunt man, a Harvard-trained lawyer, a former Navy officer, a judge who had handled the Marion Barry cocaine trial and the Bob Packwood scandal before drawing the biggest antitrust case since Standard Oil. He wrapped up that case in 80 trial days when it could have dragged on for a decade. And then he made one mistake. He told the truth about Bill Gates to a reporter. That mistake cost him the case. It cost us Office on Linux from day one. It cost us a competitive mobile market. It cost us a browser that kept improving instead of stagnating for 5 years. It cost us a search engine that might have challenged Google before Google became unchallengeable. And it cost us every product, every startup, every piece of software that was never built because its creators looked at what Microsoft did to Netscape and decided the risk was too great. Thomas Penfield Jackson never publicly revisited the Microsoft case. He never got to see whether history would prove him right. It did.